Hi, welcome back for part 3 of St. Catherine of Siena with my guest, Father Serge Probst. I'm Father John, the pastor of St. Mark in Oro Valley. Father Serge is with the Western Dominican Preaching Band. He's been a professor at the Angelicum and in other places where he's taught in the Bay Area. And in our previous 2 discussions about St. Catherine, we talked about her life, her spiritual director, Raymond of Capua. We talked about the great Avignon papacy. And we talked about the first 3 themes in her book, The Dialogue, which is how can she share in God's holiness, how she prays for the salvation of the world, and how she prays for the salvation of the church, the reform of the church, especially starting with the holiness of priests. And so I've asked Father Serge to talk to us about the fourth great petition in the dialogues.
Well, the fourth petition was for her confessor, Father Raymond of Capua, who she understood God was going to use as an instrument for the reform of the church. But first of all, for the reform of the Dominican order, which was in chaos after the damage done by the Black Death, the Black Plague. And so she prays for him. And the answer she gets for Raymond is kind of interesting because it deals again with the reform of the clergy. Raymond is counseled to work out his own holiness by working for the spiritual good of others as his greatest concern. In other words, forget himself, share with other people the grace that God gives to him. In other words, don't lord it over people, serve people. And this is nothing less than a constant cooperation with grace. Whether we're in prayer or whether we're working, whether we're serving, it all has to be done in cooperation with God's grace. That means we're doing it in accord of God's will. Because the book is basically a dialogue, Catherine is inviting all of us to enter into this dialogue and to begin, as it were, to refer it back to ourselves. And in talking about Raymond of Capua, she again emphasizes one of the great themes of the Dominican order, which is truth, God's truth. And again, that truth is about God's love for us and the way in which we can express that love in our service of others and so kind of imitate God's love for us. In the conferences, she writes that truth is to be the font of love and love is to be the longing for truth. The two aren't separate. They're one thing. She writes, a soul rises up, restless for the tremendous desire for God's honor and the salvation of souls. She has for some time exercised herself in virtue and has become accustomed to dwelling in the cell of self-knowledge in order to know better God's goodness toward her, since upon knowledge follows love, and loving she seeks to pursue truth and clothe herself in it. What Catherine is saying is she's learned the relationship between truth and love. They aren't separate. They're one reality, and that has to be the very heart of our own, as it were, self-reformation. It's kind of like the unity of breathing. When you breathe out and you breathe in and you breathe out, it's not something that's different. There's no time stop. It's something that continues our whole life long. So for Catherine, her contemplation and her activity aren't 2 separate things. It's simply a matter of emphasis. At times she's emphasizing in her life more the contemplation, but in that contemplation she's still praying for the salvation of the world, for the reform of the church, for Christians to become better. And then when she's in her activity, she's still contemplating God's love, the goodness of human beings, the beauty of the world that he created. So it's one act, it's one life.
So truth is to goodness like breath is to the body. You
That's
can't
right.
really separate them.
You can't
out.
separate them.
There is, Bishop Barron talked about it in his film, but it's an image that keeps showing up in the dialogues, and it's this idea of this raging river and this bridge across the river, and the bridge is Christ. Would you explain that?
Well, the bridge is kind of unusual. First, let's talk about the water. The water is chaos. It's sin. Once you immerse yourself in sin, there's no hope. The force of the current carries you out to sea and you're lost. There's no way you yourself can, as it were, cross the river.
Addictions get worse and
Get
worse.
worse and worse. Everything gets worse. It doesn't get better. The little river goes into the ocean, which gets larger and larger and deeper and deeper. The bridge, though, that she's imagining is a bridge like you would find in Italy in the Middle Ages, like the Ponte
Vecchio.
in Florence. If you go to look at this bridge, you'll notice there are several levels to the bridge. It's not just a bridge going across a river. It's one level on either side of which are stores and houses and so forth. Then there's a second level that you can go up and down across the bridge. It also has stores and houses. And then there's a third level. So her understanding is that Christ just doesn't ferry us from this life to eternal life. He's also the means in which we can change ourselves by grace to become more and more like him. So you don't travel simply across the bridge, you travel up the bridge.
So she has this image about the bridge, and then she mixes a metaphor, and she's talking about kissing Jesus' feet, kissing his side, and kissing the lips. What's that all about?
The kissing of his feet means that we are trying to follow Jesus, but basically out of servile fear. I'm afraid of hell, so I'm going to cling to Jesus. That's good. You're at his feet, but you haven't gone very far. Then it moves a little higher. I really love Jesus, but in kind of a selfish way. So I get to his heart. But she also has a doctrine of the exchange of hearts. Jesus' heart becomes part of my heart. At that moment, we're moving to the third level, which is the kiss. And the kiss is related to the kiss of marriage, the nuptial kiss, in which Jesus and I become one flesh and one body. Now, she doesn't mean this absolutely literally, but it does mean that Jesus lives in me and I live in Jesus.
You know, I know you're aware of this, but how this is often taught, how it's come down in tradition, is the three stages of the spiritual life. There's the purgative stage, where you love God and want to overcome sin. There's the illuminative stage, where God's light lightens your heart. You get to see your sinfulness and you learn to love like God loves. And then there's the unitive stage. And that is when you experience unity with God. But this is what I was taught, and I'm wondering what you think of it. Those stages of going from Jesus' feet to his side to his lips, from the purgative to the illuminative to the unitive, is, I was told that it's not really a linear process. It's like those scrubbing bubbles, that they're constantly working and you're experiencing a deeper purgation from sin, a brighter illumination, and a closer unity. Is that true, or is it like
I think
bowl of stuff
right.
that
and I see this
this
implied in St. Catherine. If you think about it, think of Jesus standing here and a sinner coming up and kissing his feet. If he's now going to move up to the heart, notice his body is now traveling up Jesus' body, so more of his body is in contact with Jesus. So he's now, as it were, at his heart. But to get all the way to his lips, what has to happen? You have to give all of yourself with nothing left out to Jesus. But notice, my heart is still next to his heart, my feet are next to his feet. So I'm not ignoring the other two, they're all growing with me, they're all intensifying it. Again, it's that whole idea of this unity. I always call it non-duality. If you take a piece of paper and you draw a line diagonally across it, you can draw a linear line, vertical line, anywhere you want, but it's going to cut through that diagonal line. So there is some part of that line that's above and some part that's below. If it's on the left-hand side, then there'll be more of the you'll be hitting it higher on the diagonal line, and you have above and below. If you move to the other end, it's lower. But it's never a place where you can draw a line on the line or on the paper that doesn't, as it were, involve both halves that linear defines.
And so, bring in the image of the three-story bridge, the image of Christ on the cross. You know, St. Paul said, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me.
Right.
And that the whole life of holiness, which is how we started about, salvation of the world, reform of the church, the holiness of priests and the pursuit of holiness, that this is what the Christian life is, to come your life into conformity with Christ. So how did Catherine die? How did her story end?
Well, she died in a certain sense in defeat, because it was the beginning of the great schism in the church.
After the Avignon Papacy, the Great Western Schism.
And that really hurt her. But I think in a sense she died in peace, because by then she knew that God's will was going to be accomplished, period. And to do the best we can, and that we're witness his love. Maybe the greatest lesson she teaches to us is, regardless of what's happening in the world around us, the only way we can truly influence it is by letting God love us. Everything flows out of his love for us. And his love for us is so unexpected, so unusual, so strange, that she gives him a nickname. And I love her nickname for Jesus. He's the madman of love. He's insane. He's a lunatic. At least that's what it seems to us. That's how radical his love is.
He does not barter with us.
He doesn't barter with us. And so what we simply need to do is to give in to this madman of love. Let him love us, and then try to love others as he loves us. That's the secret.
And so here's a way to think about your life. And he said it when he said that St. Catherine died in some sense thinking she was a failure. And I think a lot of people think like that. Parents think like that. Priests look at declining vocations. I know I can feel like that. But that is a love conformed to the cross. Because in a certain sense, the crucifixion is about a massive failure of Jesus to convert the people of Israel. But it's what God brings out of that failure is what saves the world. And so it is, I think, where God can bring unexpected goods out of what human beings think is frustration. And so just because things are going your way doesn't mean it's God. Just because things are going against you doesn't mean that it isn't God working in your life. God is something far more than we can understand. We can only give our lives to him. So Father Serge, I want you to thank you for taking the time to talk about St. Catherine of Siena, one of the handful of women named doctors of the church.
That's right.
I always like to point out that I think Teresa of Lisieux is a doctor, Teresa of Avila is a doctor, St. Catherine is a doctor, and there's a fourth who is escaping me.
I don't know.
Oh, anyway, those are the three I remember. None of them graduated high school. So
That's right.
Yeah, understanding of God is a gift of infused grace. And so until we come up with whatever is going to happen tomorrow, where we see what God is going to do for us, then let's say our prayers, and let's always hope in the goodness of God, and maybe a little bit less in our own efforts. God bless you, and go in peace.